So today I wanted to talk a little bit about another of these helpful ideas. It's very big, probably one of the Buddha's most helpful ideas, and also to say, well, what these ideas, what are helpful to what? Just to make that absolutely clear. So it's ideas or views that conduce to freedom, that take us closer to the goal of the spiritual life, and ideas that can in a very immediate way reduce the level of dukkha, the level of suffering in the mind, in the moment. Sometimes an idea can be that effective, if you like. And they're not ideas in the sense that you might want to reflect on them at some point, but in the practice, they're just ideas to hold. They're just held in the back of the mind. Even just hearing about them, you can perhaps trust hearing about them might almost be enough for them to be held provisionally in the mind as you check them out against your direct experience. So the right view was the Buddha's idea I wanted to talk about today. So traditionally, right view assumes the doctrine of conditionality. So the idea that everything arises on the basis of causes and conditions, that things don't arise because we want them to necessarily, but because the conditions are there that support them coming into being. I was thinking of a very simple example, a very universal example for probably many of the population. So I don't lose weight because I want to, however much I want to lose weight, unless I look at what I'm eating. Maybe I look at the amount of exercise I'm doing. Maybe there are other conditions such as medication that I take. There's all sorts of conditions and factors that come into whether that desire, that wanting, is able to be translated into an effect. There have to be the conditions in place. So wanting can be one of the motivating factors. It can be a factor in that mix, but often that's the main one that we think of. We think our will is what gets things done. We identify very strongly with our will, and we'll be looking at will a little bit later in the week when we touch on the skandha of or samskara or volition and agency. So perhaps there are two. When we're talking about right view, it's helpful to look at wrong view, not in the sense that it's bad, but it's not helping us see things clearly. It's usually obscuring clear seeing. So the view that things happen because we want them to is a wrong view. It's a misreading of reality. But another view is that we think of our experience as a thing or a variety of things. In the very simplest way, my body, my mind, different things. So we solidify and concretize experience into things. So we turn experience into concepts, ideas about experience, and in the process they usually become things. The leg thing, the foot thing, the sore back thing, the thought thing. So anything that in a way that becomes concretized and conceptualized, usually we turn it into some sort of thing. So we make sort of chunks out of experience in this process of solidifying. And this is the role of perception. This is perception recognition, and another of the skandhas. This is its job, if you like, is to help us be able to recognize things quickly. In evolutionary terms, to recognize safety or danger, and be able to relax if it's safe, and to be able to run if it's dangerous. So there's a whole biological rationale behind, if you like, the conditions that cause perception to work as it does. But what that does, those shortcuts do, is that they are part of what mask us seeing things clearly, seeing things as they are. And that's why the emphasis in this sort of practice is on just looking to be as much as possible with what's actually happening in this relaxed, open, spacious way. And yeah, so that's what we're doing. We're exploring what's happening. And part of that exploring is recognizing the concepts as they appear. Recognize, oh, that's a concept. That's not actually the truth of a thing. That's an idea about what's happening. And so, say in right, we can have right view of body and right view of mind. So right view of body, it's very simple to recognize, oh, we're thinking, even that quite implicit level of thinking in quite a subtle way. There's definitely an image or an idea about the body, my body, usually my body and the different parts of my body. So what we're looking to do is drop down, if you like, into sensation, pressure, heat, movement, tightness, ease, looseness, spaciousness. Just checking in with what the experience of the body is in a different sort of way. In a sense of the processes that are continually changing from moment to moment, vibrations, tickles, movements. But it's exactly the same with mind, with this right view of mind or mental processes. That things arise in dependence upon certain conditions, that there's the cause and effect process there. And again, not because we want them to or we don't want them to. So for example, most of the time we can't choose what thoughts arise in the mind. We can choose to think certain thoughts, but we can't choose what arises or what doesn't arise. And there's that classic of yeah, don't think of an elephant. Don't think about an elephant in a pink tutu right now. Go on. You must not do that. And then what does the mind do? It can't help. Almost there's automatically an image I mean, some people are more visual than others, but some sense of an elephant in a pink tutu. So we're very suggestive. We're very influenced by and interactive with our environment, which whether that's sort of in terms of other people or other things in the environment. And that's not surprising. That's not an error, because one of the ideas we have is of this sense of us as distinct and separate from others and from the world around us. But actually we're very porous. We're much more porous than perhaps we sense, because there's, it's this wrong view in the mind of separateness. So when right view is combined with awareness, it allows us, so right view with awareness is what allows us to see all the other views and perspectives, opinions and ideas in the mind, in our own mind. Rather than being, if you like, being, sometimes I use an image of the car, rather than sort of, if you like, being in the driving seat of our experience. Sorry, I'm becoming a little bit distracted. I know the messages are necessary. I can't help but not look at them, so I'll maybe start again with that. A helpful question can be, if we're relaxed and settle back, noticing what's the point of view in the mind. If you like, we're looking to recognize the different sort of conditioned views that pop up in the mind. Can notice what we're thinking, we can notice how we're feeling about a situation or a person, if you like, rather than those views being implicit and unseen in the mind, because we're quite identified with them. They're part of how we see ourselves. They're all bound up together. But once we've got this slightly settled back perspective, we're able to recognize more easily the type of thoughts and ideas working in the mind. They move from being implicit to a more explicit, more easily recognized. The teacher Byron Katie, I have a little quote from her that some of you will be familiar with. She says, "We don't attach to people or to things, but to uninvestigated concepts that we believe to be true in the moment." We don't attach to people or to things, but to uninvestigated concepts that we believe to be true in the moment. So when we have that settle back awareness with a helpful perspective in the mind, and those ideas, those concepts are able, and views can move from being implicit to explicit to clearly known in the mind. That's all that's needed in terms of investigation. We use awareness and right view working together with interest to recognize uninvestigated concepts in the mind. So again, it's not that we get into thinking a lot about what's happening, but we allow awareness and right view to do their work. And once these views, these concepts move from being implicit to explicit, we don't quite believe them in the same way. Once we see them, we're seeing them as a thought or as an idea in the mind, rather than completely buying into the concept, buying into the content of what's happening. So we become aware that we're using concept in the mind. So I want to talk about something that's very closely allied to right view. And for those of you that are familiar with the Satipatthana Sutta, it's the fourth Satipatthana, that of Dhammas. And I tend to equate it with right view. The Dhamma, or Dhamma in Pali, has a lot of different meanings, and the one that we're most familiar with is Dhamma as the teaching, the Buddha's teaching, the law. But it has a lot of other meanings, and one of them, the one relevant in this case, is phenomena. Dhamma as phenomena. And Analayo, who a couple of you have mentioned, Analayo says the fourth Satipatthana is the perspective from which to view the other three. So the Satipatthana, kaya, body, feeling, and mind. So really we've got the skandhas in there, we've got body and mind in the first three Satipatthana. So the fourth Satipatthana is the perspective from which we view all experience. And that is the perspective of right view. So we view what's happening rather than as things, as phenomena, as changing, moving, happenings, arisings, phenomena. Or another way, which I'll be using quite a lot, is as objects in experience. So a happening or an object arising in experience. The scholar Richard Gombrich has again, it's a footnote in Analayo's book that I love. His first book says, right view, he's talking about looking through Buddhist coloured spectacles. So usually our spectacles are coloured by all our other views. They're coloured by the lens of greed, of wanting something from a situation or a person, or of not wanting. So the different colourings of greed and aversion. And if in those moments when they're not coloured strongly by either of those, they're often coloured by delusion. The colourings, the lens of delusion, of not seeing clearly, of seeing primarily in self-referential terms, with me as a centre, wrong view of self, or we're seeing in terms of ideas and concepts rather than the direct experience. So that might be an image that you find helpful, just in terms of what colour are my spectacles today, or in this moment. How is the lens that that awareness is looking through? How is that coloured today? Because one of the qualities of awareness is that of impartiality. So, and especially when awareness and mindfulness and wisdom are working together, there'll be much less of that colouring. So another helpful idea, I hope. So right view works with right attitude. So right attitude asks the question, how am I relating to this experience? And it's often in the realm of greed and aversion, which we'll be going into more tomorrow, I think. Is it possible to detect in the relationship to a particular object? Maybe it's a relationship to the view. Maybe seeing is happening and you notice, you might ask that question. Perhaps you feel some tension coming into the mind. How am I relating to that experience? Is there a sense of wanting or not wanting something to happen? I sometimes have the experience when I'm meditating, because I'm in the cabin at the bottom of the garden, And it's quite a catwalk. It's a bit like foxes. They seem to like the same route, and they can actually get right through from our garden, because we have a little passage, side passage, and we have a bowling green at the back with a fence that they can just about get under. So, and when they come through our garden, sometimes they stop and they spray, or they look like they're about to have a crap. And so I can feel in my mind this sort of, I'm just sort of waiting. And if in those moments I was to say, how am I relating to seeing, to what's happening, there'd be a definite sense of tension, of possibly aversion to what might happen. And it may not, they just may wander through the garden, disappear under the fence, and do their business elsewhere. So whatever the experience is, there's always the possibility of, rather than being caught in the event itself, what's being seen, what's being heard, what's being smelt or tasted, to check what's happening in the mind, check what's happening. And that's where the practice is going. It's much more about what is happening in that relationship to experience. And there's a quality of mind that the Buddha talks about in one of the ways that he defines right mindfulness. There are 4 qualities, and this one of the qualities is very much about how we are relating to experience. And the phrase he uses is are we free from desires and discontent in regard to the world of the senses? So we have this, in this phrase, I think, a strong sort of sense of a dharmic reference, part of right view. And if you like, we're not looking to try and make, not looking to samsara in quite the same way to fulfill our needs, our desires, our satisfactions. If you like, we're prioritizing the mind, we're prioritizing the quality of the awareness, the quality of the mind, which can mean letting go to some extent of of what's important in the worldly sense. You know, perhaps I can prioritize my I suppose this example I gave of the cat's walking through the garden. I can use it as an opportunity to watch the mind, and therefore have the chance to cultivate more awareness and purify the mind. Or I can get agitated and on occasion even get up and run after these cats, clapping my hands to make them go away. There's a time and a place, but there's also times when it isn't the time and the place. So with this freedom from desires and discontent, your happiness isn't dependent upon something pleasant happening or continuing, or something unpleasant stopping. So there's an independence from whatever's happening, and that might be things that are happening externally, and it might be things that are happening in the mind or in the body. Perhaps there's a pain in the body, and to the extent that there's some ease rather than discontent or a desire for it to go away or to stop, to the extent that there can be ease, this is a happening in the body. At times the body will experience discomfort. There's a wisdom in that attitude. And there's an independence from conditions. We're able to be with our experience with less demand on how it is, how it should be. And there can be a confidence that awareness can hold whatever arises. And with this sense of ease, there's less struggle with how things are. And then perhaps it's a temporary freedom, but in those moments of lack of struggle, there's a freedom from reactivity, there's a freedom from the wanting mind, and quite a sense of relief from that. So I've mentioned the Skandhas a few times, and before I say a couple of things about working practically in meditation with these ideas, I just want to say a little bit about the Skandhas, just because I mentioned them, but I've not actually said what they are, and it may be that some of you aren't so sure. And at this point, I'll just mention them and say how we will be looking and exploring them in the next few days. So the Skandhas, translated as aggregates, which may not help that much, actually. It's a funny sort of word, isn't it? Aggregates, this building term, or heaps. So it's a model for the whole of our psychophysical organism. A model, another way of talking about body and mind. In fact, Bhante says we can, the simplest way of talking about the Skandhas is body and mind, or nama rupa, sort of mentality and materiality. But there are five Skandhas. So form is the physical component, the form of the body, and then we have feeling. Sometimes I might ask you in meditation, just checking into the feeling of the mind, how the mind feels. So that's a very simple, very accessible way of being with experience. It's through the quality of feeling. Feeling works with perception, and yeah, saying more about that, because then perception is able to, if you like, interpret, or it's able to give rise to a more subtlety of feeling, or more categorization of feeling into pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. But initially, just we have feeling, and then we have perceptions, conceptualization as the third skandha, and then the fourth one, mental formations, which mental formations. So the ways in which we act, in a way, the samskaras, tendencies, we tend towards actions of body, speech, and mind. So volition comes in here, and this sense of, it's one of the places where we get a strong sense of agency, a sense of me. And then consciousness, the consciousness that's knowing what's happening. So primarily, I'll be talking about the skandhas. The skandhas are the aggregates of clinging. So without clinging, in a sense, they're quite neutral. They're a model of how the mind is working. It's the fact that we cling to them, and this sense of agency. It's not just about the skandha of samskara. It's the ways that the skandhas work together with clinging forms our sense of self, the sense of who I am. So I want to talk about the relationship, particularly the relationship of mindfulness, what a difference mindfulness makes in relation to each of these components. I have got it's great. Lots of you have been looking at the resources pages on my blog about the practice and about some of the territory that we're covering. today I'll put up another page about the Skandhas, just to give a bit more background for that. But another definition of mindfulness in its fuller sense, which I just came across recently, is of being aware of, if we're really mindful, then actually we know the Skandhas as simply processes of mind and body, interrelating processes of mind to body. When we see them as processes, we are not identifying with them. When we're not identifying with them, what that means is that there is a lack of clinging, there's a lack of hanging on and solidifying these processes into that fixed sense of I am my body, I am my feelings, I am my thoughts, I believe my thoughts, they are true. And I'm the one who's acting, who's deciding, who's knowing, who's being conscious of. So if you like, how bringing mindfulness to the Skandhas, yeah, there's the potential for that mechanism, at least in moments, to just fall apart, to just fall, to open and be seen in a completely different way. Okay, but what do we do with this experience? What do we do with all this information? So one practical thing is to check the point of view in the mind. At any moment, ask the question, and sometimes the view reveals itself. You don't need to look really strongly, but what's the point of view in the mind at the moment? It can be particularly helpful during moments where you've got a sense that there's some agitation or some stress in your experience, perhaps through the body or through the mind. Times of maybe there's a judgment in the mind about somebody else or about yourself, perhaps some defensiveness, or a sense of I'm right is a good one, or I want. Obviously they may not be fully formed thoughts, but they can sometimes be felt, if not as thoughts, then images or urges in the body. So what's the point of view in the mind? You just check in with that question. And then the second thing is just noticing how you're relating to experience, and particularly if you're relating to what's arising, a thought, a body sensation, a sound. Are you noticing those happenings as happenings or arisings? Are you noticing them as objects in experience? Something a bit sort of more spacious, less personal, less identified, say with a thought or a feeling as me or mine? Or is there a sense of experience being known as some relationship to me or mine, this pain in my knee, and then sometimes the mind can start to worry about it. Yeah, there's something wrong, or I shouldn't be doing this, or I better move, or a lot of prapancha can come around, and that's quite a good indication that there is a sense of identification with experience, and actually, yeah, when in that moment we're not able to know the pain in my knee as simply sensation arising in the body. And actually it's fine not to know. Number two is as good as number one, if you like, in a sense that we're just looking to see what's happening. well and good if you notice things in this less personal way, from this settled back position of happenings, objects arising in experience. If you notice this sense of clinging or a sense of self or identification, great, you're noticing it. It was implicit before, probably, and now it's become explicit. So what we can say here, that there's a wrong view in the mind, there's a wrong view of self, but it's being known by right view. It's being seen more clearly. So that means that right view is working in the mind at that point. So one of the things I was saying yesterday is it's not about the object. The object is secondary. What's happening is secondary, and what's primary is the awareness of it. Sometimes say any object will do. That's why it doesn't really matter what we're aware of, because they're, in a way, it's all, change my metaphor again, it's all sort of fuel from which to be able to help awareness and wisdom strengthen. We're cultivating and exercising, if you like, those muscles of awareness and wisdom. So that's plenty from me. Something I meant to say yesterday of a practical nature. So I'm going to just open it up just to a few sort of questions or comments now, just primarily to make sure things are clear. This can be a little bit abstract. If you want to ask a question, but you don't want to be seen all over the internet, you don't want to, I don't imagine there'll be a massive sort of, I don't imagine too many people will be seeing this video, but feel free to turn off your video, before you ask your question, if you prefer. We'll still obviously have the sound, but it won't have the visual. Okay, so are there any comments or questions before we have a little leg stretch and then sit? Things that perhaps either they're not clear, or maybe there's a little bit of discomfort, or what about this? And maybe run it by Vajrapriya. Vajrapriya maybe will clock and...
I've clocked Shakyajata, so do you want to unmute yourself, Shakyajata?
Hi. Hello. Hello. Hello.
We've got Leela Siddhi here. Vajrapriya?
Can I just check with Shakyajata first?
Yeah, please.
Okay, we'll come to you in a minute, Leela Siddhi.
Right. It seems rather scary, what you said earlier on in the talk about not having any control about what comes into our minds.
Okay.
Yeah, that strikes me as really scary. And surely what I'm doing here in practicing mindfulness is to try and increase, if not exactly control, then, well, to, as it were, improve the condition of my mind, in the direction of mindfulness, which is what we're trying to do. Aren't those two things a bit contradictory?
Yeah, good point. So we are generally overall improving the condition of our mind through setting up positive conditions on a sort of conscious level. That's what we're doing, and that will influence the mind. The Burmese teacher Sayadaw U Pandita, he says any thought can arise in any mind at any time. I think in a way to give that sense of in a way, perhaps we have influence. This is something Vajrapriya says at times, where we have influence over our minds, but we don't necessarily have control. So we can influence through positive conditions, and then it's like skillful thoughts will arise in our mind more of the time. There's an awful lot of thoughts though that are quite sort of neutral, and in a way that's the elephant in a pink tutu is one of those. It's really just about the way the mind works. The way the mind works, it is suggestible to all sorts of influences from outside, and in a way it's quite neutral what arises, and quite ethically neutral in a sense what arises in the mind, but what we do with that is up to us. So there can be all sorts of, if you like, things that the fruition of past karma, that it fruits in the moment, and maybe that makes us more or less susceptible to certain influences, external or internal influences, but we can't in a way control that, but within the present moment, particularly if we're aware in the present moment, there is more possibility of creative response to that arising. So in a way it is quite neutral, and I think the practice works with that, in that it says it's reassuring. I think what Sayadaw U Pandita is saying about any thought arising in any mind at any time, it says don't take it too seriously. These arisings, they're just arisings, they're just happenings, here and gone, here and gone. And if we start thinking, oh, well, that's a terrible thought and I'm a terrible person for having it, then sorry, I was wondering why my computer was going a bit dark. The battery's not in. Then we start responding with some degree of anxiety or aversion or wanting things to be different. So in a sense that fluid, if we open to that fluidity of any thought arising at any time, then we allow things to in a way have their karmic moment and then pass on. They just pass on because we haven't reacted to them. Yeah. So actually I think there's quite a lot of freedom in it.
Thank you.
Okay. Leela Siddhi.
I think my question is very related to the previous question. Sometimes when, say, a negative thought arises, I get confused between just being aware of it and taking an interventionalist stance.
Yeah.
And averting to some other thought, or, so I get lost. Help.
Yeah. So I think different practices will have different sort of ways of working with this territory, and maybe if we think in terms of the hindrances and the antidotes, that can be a helpful framework. So it might be with some practices that you're working with more active antidotes to the hindrances, like cultivating the opposite with a particular sorts of thoughts or feelings. But what we always do at the beginning, and I think sometimes we skip over this a bit, is to just in a way be aware of what's happening, be aware of the hindrances, or however we define it in that moment, that a particular mind state. So there's awareness, there's a knowing of it. And in this more receptive type of practice, we give more weight to that awareness and say that sometimes just awareness of what's happening, and I think there has to be some sort of right view, there has to be some Dharma perspective in the mind for it to be most effective. But it can be seen really clearly, aversion in the mind, thinking happening, and that the mind that is aware does not have the same quality in it as the aversive state that it's being aware of. So if you like, we can recognize both, and in the recognition by this positive state of mindfulness, sometimes, not always, sometimes the mind state, the negative or difficult mind state will shrink. Sometimes it won't. We just got both. We got there. We got, but we're giving more weight to interest. What does aversion feel like in the mind? That's a question from awareness, or that's an observation from awareness. How does irritation feel in the body? So there's that objectivity to it. So we're not suppressing, we're not indulging in the state, but we're aware of it in an effective way. And I think sometimes that's what it is. We can think, but I'm aware of it, and I still feel like it's overrunning my mind. So it's shifting that balance through, in a way, as I say, giving more weight to awareness and right view. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Got questions also from Alan and Kamala Gita.
Okay, so we'll just take the question from Alan and then Kamala Gita, and then we'll move on. Alan.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Something that I think for me is underlying all these ideas. Could you say something about the difference or differences between consciousness and awareness?
Yeah, I'll try and do my best. Yeah. So consciousness is a factor that's just recognizing. It's just very simply recognizing the particular object that it arises with. So whenever something arises, it arises in consciousness, or it arises with consciousness, if you like. So it's always there. It's always there. Awareness is not always there. It's not an omnipresent mental event. It's something that needs to be cultivated, and it's not just this very, very sort of basic knowing, which consciousness is. Awareness has a lot more going for it, if you like. I don't know where I heard this little phrase, but maybe I made it up myself. But sati, mindfulness, sati plays well with others. So it plays its friends. It has friends like interest and curiosity, and clearly knowing, this sort of insight dimension, and this sense of being free from desires and discontent, and a sense of seeing more clearly. So right mindfulness, when mindfulness is fully developed, it has all of this going for it, rather than just this very sort of limited consciousness that just recognizes the object that it's sort of coupled with.
So it's like perception, consciousness.
Consciousness is different to perception, because it doesn't even have the capacity to label things, but it works with. So perception would work with, and that would be perception's bit of the job, would be the sort of labeling, the recognizing. Yeah.
So awareness is the Buddhist coloured spectacles.
That can be awareness and right view. Yeah, awareness working with wisdom. But within right mindfulness, there is because it's right, it's part of the Noble Eightfold Path. So it will have wisdom as an element. It will have wisdom in there. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Kamala Gita.
Yeah, it's just a comment on what Shakyajata was asking about, which is that I've noticed on solitary retreats, over the years, how desperate my mind becomes to dredge up more and more kind of scary types of thoughts, really. And, that there's something about little mind being spooked by big mind, allowing it to kind of you know, through this sort of process, kind of unmoor really and sail away. So yeah, so just kind of noticing that, and I find it quite funny really that the more I practice, the more the mind will come up with something quite extreme really, you know, to just try and keep me where it sees its safety zone, and just observing that. So yeah, and I think the other thing I wanted to just say is that I really think this approach really saved me from developing postnatal depression, because I just had lots of really painful thoughts about myself and my ability to care for my child. But because I was working in this way, I could just really see them and let them go, you know, and recognize. So, you know, it's just quite interesting how it develops as we practice more really. So
yeah, big effects on something that could have had a massive effect on your life in terms of postnatal depression. Yeah, thanks, and thanks for the image of big mind and little mind, and the unmooring. I like that. Yeah, I definitely have that sense of the mind when it's unmoored and untethered from views, from limiting and limited perspectives. Yeah, thank you. Okay, let's have a couple of minutes just to leg stretch, and then we'll sit. I'll lead us through a sit, and like yesterday, then we'll have a little break, and we can stop the recording. Okay, so settling comfortably. Sitting quite naturally. You might be sitting, you might be lying down. Just finding a posture that is going to support awareness and relaxation. And you can think of relaxing into awareness. And particularly letting the feeling of that awareness permeate. Yeah, sense of embodied mind, mindful embodiment. Connecting with the breath, perhaps, letting the out breath allow the weight to sink more onto the chair, the cushion, or whatever surface the body is resting on. Allow our awareness to accompany different sensations that you notice within the body. And this is quite a natural process. Awareness, recognizing different sensations. As the attention moves to different parts of experience, if we're present, then awareness will be there too. Present to heat, vibration, pressure, movement, movement of the body, movement of mind. Settling back, resting in awareness. And if you're present, you at times will quite naturally notice things through different sense doors. Noticing that hearing is happening. If your eyes are open, noticing that seeing is happening. And noticing that sensing is happening through the tactile body. And whenever we're aware in this way of process of hearing or seeing, touching, then there's some degree of right view in the mind. We're aware of processes rather than static things. At times you might just check how you're relating to experience. In a more personalized way. Sense of I'm feeling, I'm thinking. Or perhaps more in relation to objects simply arising under their own conditions and disappearing when those conditions run out of fuel. And whichever perspective it is, our job is just to recognize it clearly. The job of awareness. Awareness doesn't judge, doesn't decide one perspective is better than another. Recognizing clearly what's happening. As part of the right view, perspective, idea in the mind. It can be helpful to recognize the two different modes of being. Either when the mind is thinking about something or conceptualizing around an object, and when it's able to just be directly with the sensations, the sounds, with less emphasis on the concept. And notice any moments where there's a sense of the mind being free from desires and discontent. And perhaps a sense of contentment and ease with whatever's happening in experience, be it pleasant or unpleasant. There can be a freedom from demand that the experience be a particular way, the way that we want it to be. And a greater willingness to just let it be how it is. The experience is happening anyway, regardless of whether we want it or don't want it. Mindfulness and right view say, is it possible to just be with it as it happens? Any thought, any experience can arise in any mind at any time. Whatever arises, seeing if it's possible to have that happening, arising, persisting, disappearing. Letting experience flow and move through by itself. We're learning to get out of our own way. Learning not to interfere with experience coming and going. Objects arising, passing. Objects arising, changing in some way, passing. And just before we end, I'm going to read a short few lines from Joseph Goldstein. He says, "It is interesting that concepts remain fixed, while reality is always in flux. The word body stays the same, but the body itself is always ever changing. The concept is static, but when we actually experience what is happening, we discover a flow of impermanent elements. The mindful experience of things reveals their true impermanent nature." So if you have a question, perhaps hold that, but just anything you'd perhaps like to just articulate about perhaps that practice, where you felt the interest was there, or perhaps you noticed the perspective that was in the mind, the point of view was in the mind. So just if a couple of people are willing to speak, and then we'll have a fairly short break.
The instant I notice the object, it disappears.
Okay, so this is Matthew. Yep. Can't
Yeah.
see. Can't see. Yeah. So the instant you noticed the object, it disappeared. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what?
Quietness ensues for a little bit of time, and then another object appears in mind, and then quietness ensues for a bit of time. I'm okay with that.
Great. Thank you very much. Good. Anyone else?
I noticed something.
Yeah.
It's Joe.
Joe, great. There you are. Yes, got you.
Hi.
Hi.
I kind of found this place a couple of times, had this experience of a sort of, quite visual, a sort of corner almost, where I could play with sliding into, you know, everything, and then just the awareness coming back. And there was a couple of times where I could just play with it slightly and feel the quality of sliding into thoughts and stories. And then it's not exactly what we're doing, but it was quite an interesting sensation. And then to come back into awareness again and kind of slide with that slightly and feel the different qualities of that. And then be able to observe myself doing that as well.
Yeah, no, it's exactly what we're doing. Yeah,
Okay.
great. So it's something that's happening in the mind, and already that there's some interest, and the awareness is able to notice that process, quite a subtle process. So I think it's absolutely in the territory. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Maybe one last person before we have a break.
I'll try to articulate. I had a question that popped up earlier on, which was, if I can remember it, I did write it down actually, but something like, if we,
Okay, good. Yes.
if we didn't, you know, like or dislike something, if we weren't reaching towards it or pushing it away, would we actually register it in consciousness? And then when we were meditating just now, I, you know, totally got the very simplistic really view, as it were, that of course everything is here, well, you know, lots of stuff, not everything actually, but you know, lots of the bushes outside me, for instance, you know, they will be there even when I'm not here. So they arise independent of conditions, completely irrespective of me. Of course, the plant that I planted is there because I planted it. And in the future, other people might pull out these bushes and then they will no longer be there. So, you know, the dependence of conditions. But it's obviously, sorry, it's very simple, but it was just quite, I don't know, just, and then looking at my rug and seeing the tassels on the end, and you know, they were cotton, they were plants once, and the wool that it's woven from was wool on sheep's back. Yeah.
So it sounds like quite a lot of reflection around different aspects of conditionality, different conditions.
Yes.
How things have come into being. Yeah, which is great. See if you can observe that in your own experience, in your direct experience. There's because we can reflect and we can think about things, which is great. And I think it's helpful to in get that sense of conditionality in different ways. But I think we get a different sense of it when we notice the connections in our direct experience, not through thinking about them, but through perhaps there's a thought that you directly see how it conditions the feeling that arises from it.
Right.
And then that feeling, maybe it's an unpleasant feeling, perhaps that conditions a contraction in the body or an image arising in the mind. So that's another way of, in a way, bringing conditionality really close to home, close to the actual experience. But thank you for bringing out distinction. Okay, so thank you for volunteering. Yeah. So I make it 2 minutes past 12. Let's try for a 10-minute break today. See how it goes, and then we'll come back and we'll just have maybe I've got one more thing to say, and then we'll have a short just sitting and have another reading as well before we break for lunch. Oh, and we'll hear a little bit from Savatanyana about this afternoon session just before we break. So good. Which is sometimes the language of objects can leave some people feeling a bit cold, or it's a bit cool, a bit detached. So I just wanted to say something about that. There can be a sense of pulling back from life, a sense of pulling back from vitality, or take the enjoyment away. And I just wanted to say that in a sense we're detaching from attachment. We're detaching from identification with experience. So that's that settling back, that sense of training in recognizing things a bit more objectively as objects arising, rather than having our usual subjective relationship to them, which is we're merged with them and stuck to them. So Sayadaw U Tejaniya in Burma, he likes to say we're detached from defilement. We're not detached from life or from loving. We're still involved, but we have a wiser involvement with experience. So perhaps bear that in mind if you find this language of objects. You can always use happenings or arisings, if you like. But yeah, we're in a way looking to. It can feel a bit cool because it's more impersonal, and that's quite deliberate, because our taking things personally is a massive wrong view. So it's like, how do we get a little bit of perspective on that? We're seeing things a little bit more objectively. And it's the identification, the attachment to experience, as we all know, that causes suffering. So if we can lessen that identification, that attachment to experiences that we fix through these ideas that we hold, impacting on the experience, that's a good thing. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes to sit, and I'm going to read something from Bhante from Living with Awareness about objects before we start, and we'll just have a few minutes to sit with how things are for us at the moment, and then I'll hand over to Savatanyana to just say a few words about the session this afternoon. Ooh. Sorry, I wasn't plugged in, but it seemed like you could hear me anyway, so that's good. So Bhante says, mind can contemplate mind. The ability to make consciousness reflexive, to become aware that we are aware, to know that we know, seems to be a specifically human characteristic. The human mind has the capacity to turn its attention back on itself and take a questioning attitude, even to consciousness itself. In other words, although your state of consciousness is subjective, When you think about it, become aware of it, you make it into an object, a mental object, a Dhamma. You can turn you, the subject, into you, the object. For example, you don't just experience sense desire, you know that you experience it. Your desire for sense experience is part of your subjectivity, but when you become aware of this desire, you make it into an object. Savatanyana, would you like to unmute? I hope you're there. And there you are.
So when we're meeting again at 5, we're doing a couple of things around so supporting a deeper relaxation, basically. And I'll give you time then to set yourself up and say a bit more about it. For most of us, it'll be most comfortable to do this in an armchair, or if you have a garden lounger, yeah, that suits your height. Or if you want to lie on your bed, on a sofa, or on the floor with some padding. So anything you have available in that range. Yeah, so we won't be sitting in a normal meditation posture. Yeah, you won't need any specific abilities or anything. So whatever your range of movement and whatever your situation is, we can do that together. Anything else I need to say?
Sounds great.
If you do have a garden lounger, just to say that can be really the best possible posture, especially in late afternoon, because you might well be a bit sleepy. So sometimes when we then lie on our beds, we just go right to sleep. But whatever you have handy, yeah. Wherever you can be comfortable.
Thank you. Great. Okay, so we'll leave it there for this morning. And I think many of you have reviews this afternoon, so we'll see you there. And yeah, just see if you can continue with that, setting the intention that I talked about yesterday, setting the intention to be aware, and then really just noticing and weighing into leaning into those moments where you notice mindfulness is present, awareness is present. Good. All right. See you later.